The silence in the executive suite of Thorn Global Holdings wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. I moved with the practiced grace of a ghost, trying to blend into the shadows cast by the floor-to-ceiling windows. My ribs throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, a private tally of the mistakes I'd made at home the night before. Dominic Thorne sat behind his mahogany desk, a monolith of power in a charcoal suit. He didn't look up as I approached with the morning's briefing. He didn't have to. He was a man who felt the displacement of air when someone entered his radius. My goal was simple: be perfect, be invisible, and get back to my desk before the concealer on my neck began to flake. "The merger files for the Singapore acquisition, Mr. Thorne," I murmured, my voice as neutral as the gray walls. He gestured vaguely toward the top shelf of the lateral cabinet behind him. It was a test of my reach, one my body wasn't ready for. I stepped up, my fingers straining for the leather-bound folder. As I stretched, the world seemed to tilt. The silk of my cream-colored blouse betrayed me, sliding upward as my arm extended. The air in the room vanished. I felt his gaze before I saw it. It wasn't the look of a concerned employer. It was the look of a predator seeing a wound on a creature he considered his property. The hand-shaped bruise on my ribs, dark purple and etched with the cruel geometry of Marcus's fingers, was laid bare in the unforgiving morning light. I pulled my arm down instantly, the file clattering to the floor, but the damage was done. Dominic didn't move. He didn't offer a platitude or ask if I had tripped. He simply stared at the mark with a terrifying, predatory stillness that made my heart hammer against the very ribs that hurt so much. In that moment of forced exposure, the secret shame I had nearly killed myself to hide was no longer mine alone. The contrast between my two worlds was a jagged glass edge. Outside these windows, the city was a rain-soaked blur of neon and concrete. Inside, the executive suite smelled of premium espresso, expensive leather, and the cold metallic scent of absolute authority. I stood there, trembling with a relentless state of hypervigilance. For months I had been a master of the double life. By day, I was the perfectionist assistant, the woman who never missed a comma or a deadline. By night, I was a woman who learned how to fall so the bruises wouldn't show and who learned the exact frequency of a man's footsteps to predict his rage. I had thought I was safe here, protected by the glass and the height of the tower. But as Dominic Thorne rose slowly from his chair, his tall frame blocking out the light, I realized I had made a grave miscalculation. I had traded the amateur cruelty of a debt collector like Marcus for the sophisticated, world-altering power of a man who ran a sanitization firm. He didn't look disgusted by my injury. He looked like he was deciding exactly how to destroy the person who had dared to touch what belonged in his office. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth, a lingering reminder of the copper I'd tasted that morning when Marcus had pinned me against the kitchen counter. I wanted to run, to disappear into the neutral walls, but Dominic's presence acted like a vacuum, pulling me toward him. "Ivy," he said. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated in my chest. "Who did that to you?" I fell, sir." I lied, the words sounding hollow even to me. "Do not lie to me," he countered, his eyes locking onto mine with a force that felt like a physical weight. "I deal in truths that people pay millions to bury. You aren't a clumsy woman. You're a hunted one." Life at Thorn Global Holdings was an exercise in precision. Every morning, I ascended 41 floors in a private elevator, leaving behind the damp, peeling wallpaper of my basement rental and the lingering scent of stale beer that followed Marcus like a shroud. The skyscraper was my sanctuary, or so I had convinced myself. The 41st floor was a world of black glass and white marble. It was sterile, beautiful, and expensive. Here, my value was measured in efficiency. I took pride in the fact that Dominic Thorne, a man who allegedly moved the pieces of the world's economy like a chess master, relied on me. But the cost of that reliance was a level of scrutiny I was starting to find unbearable. As I sat at my workstation after the incident in his office, I tried to focus on the data entry. Every breath was a struggle. Marcus had been particularly volatile the night before, fueled by a lost bet and a bottle of cheap bourbon. He'd told me I was nothing, that without him I'd be back on the streets. He liked to remind me of my place, usually with his fists. I looked down at my hands. They were vibrating with a slight tremor. I was exhausted, not from work, but from the constant soul-crushing effort of maintaining the facade. I had spent $80 on high-end concealer just to hide the dark circles that had nothing to do with a lack of sleep and everything to do with the man I had foolishly believed once loved me. Through the glass wall of the inner office, I could see Dominic. He wasn't working. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a king surveying a battlefield. I knew that Thorn Global was a front. Everyone in the high-stakes corporate world whispered about it. They called it a consultancy, but the reality was much darker. Dominic's family didn't just invest in tech, they invested in control. They sanitized reputations. They made problems go away. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was a woman drowning in a problem I couldn't solve, working for a man whose entire career was built on solving the unsolvable. I felt a shadow fall over my desk. I didn't have to look up to know it was him. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something sharper like ozone, preceded him. "Pack your things, Ivy," he said. His tone was cold and clinical. Am I being let go? The terror was a cold spike in my gut. If I lost this job, I would lose my only leverage. I'd be trapped in that basement with Marcus forever. On the contrary, Dominic said, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. His eyes were the color of a winter sea. "You're being relocated. I don't like damaged equipment in my site, and I don't like my employees being hunted by mid-level thugs." He knew. He'd probably had a file on Marcus before I'd even finished falling for his lies. "I can't just leave," I whispered, thinking of the few belongings I had and the fear of Marcus finding me at the office. "You aren't leaving," Dominic corrected, his voice dropping to a whisper that promised both safety and a different kind of danger. "You're ascending. From now on, your life belongs to the tower. And your problems, they belong to me. If your boss offered to make your biggest problem vanish without a trace, would you ask questions or just say thank you?" The ride down the private elevator was silent. The only sounds the faint hum of high-speed cables and the frantic thudding of my heart. Dominic stood beside me, not touching me, yet his presence was a physical weight that pinned me against the mirrored wall. I watched our reflections, a man who looked like he owned the city, and a woman who looked like she'd been caught in its gears. He didn't take me to the lobby. Instead, the elevator hissed open at a secure parking level where a blacked-out SUV waited, its engine already purring. A man in a suit similar to Dominic's held the door open. "Get in, Ivy," Dominic commanded. It wasn't an invitation. As the car pulled out into the rain-slicked streets, Dominic opened a sleek laptop. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at me. "I don't like messy variables." Marcus Kane, 32, freelance debt collector for the Valenti brothers. History of assault, 3 vacated restraining orders, and a penchant for gambling with money that isn't his. Is there anything I missed? The blood drained from my face. He had disassembled my life's nightmare into a series of bullet points in the time it took to walk to the elevator. How do you know all that? "I don't hire people I haven't vetted to the bone, Ivy. I knew Marcus was a risk the day you signed your contract. I assumed you had him under control. Today, I saw that I was wrong." He leaned forward, his eyes tracking the way I flinched as we hit a pothole. "Tell me his routine." Every bar, every contact, every hour of his day. I want the surgical details. I hesitated, the ingrained fear of Marcus's retaliation screaming at me to stay silent. If he finds out I talked. He won't, Dominic interrupted, his voice flat and final. By the time he realizes the game has changed, he won't be in a position to find out anything. Now talk. I spilled it all. The bar on 4th Street where he wasted my paycheck. The gym where he blew off steam by hitting things and people. The specific way he'd come home. The sound of his key in the lock that signaled whether I should be in the kitchen or hiding in the bathroom. Dominic listened with a terrifying clinical focus, his fingers occasionally tapping a key on his laptop, sending instructions to invisible players in a game I didn't understand. By the time the SUV pulled up to the rear entrance of a luxury hotel, I felt hollowed out, as if Dominic had reached inside me and pulled out the very thing that had been killing me. He dropped me off at a luxury hotel, not my apartment, and told me to stay put. But fear is a powerful motivator, and a lifetime of being told I was nothing had made me obedient to the wrong person. I thought I could go back to the basement one last time, grab my mother's locket and my passport, and disappear before Marcus even knew I'd been relocated. It was the biggest mistake of my life. The air in the basement was thick with the smell of cheap tequila and sweat. I had barely stepped through the door when the shadow moved from the corner. Marcus didn't say a word. The first blow caught me across the jaw, sending me spinning into the kitchen table. "You think you're better than me now?" he hissed, his face contorted into something subhuman. "I saw that car drop you off at the Hilton. You're moving up, Ivy? With that suit-wearing prick." I tried to scramble toward the door, but he was faster. He grabbed my hair, yanking my head back until I was staring at the cracked ceiling. "You don't leave until I say you're done. And you aren't done until you're broken." The violence that followed was different from the others. It wasn't a lesson. It was an execution. He wasn't just angry. He was panicked, sensing his grip on me slipping. He swung the heavy glass bottle he'd been holding, and the world exploded into white light and then a terrifying, ringing silence. As I lay on the cold linoleum, my vision blurring into a haze of gray and red, I realized Dominic was right. I wasn't a clumsy woman. I was a hunted one. And as Marcus loomed over me, his shadow swallowing the light, I knew I wasn't going to survive the night. I closed my eyes, waiting for the final darkness, wondering if Dominic Thorne would even bother to clean up the mess I'd left behind. I woke to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of a rainstorm battering against glass that felt miles thick. For a moment, I panicked, thinking Marcus had finally dragged me to the bottom of the river, but the bed beneath me was made of Egyptian cotton, and the air was filtered and cool. My body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder and stitched back together with heavy thread. Every breath was a sharp, jagged reminder of the basement. The door clicked open, and Dominic stepped in. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms covered in intricate dark tattoos, symbols of a life lived in the deep end of the world. He didn't look tired. He looked settled. "You're a difficult woman to protect, Ivy," he said, his voice dropping like a stone into a dark pool. "I told you to stay at the hotel." "I needed my things," I rasped, my throat raw. "I didn't want to be a burden." Dominic pulled a chair to the side of the bed, his presence looming over me. "A burden is someone who costs more than they are worth. You aren't a burden. You're an asset. And someone decided to vandalize my assets." He leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the bandages on my face. "I arrived at your apartment 20 minutes after you did. My men were already in the neighborhood." The memory of the bottle swinging toward my head flashed back, the whistling sound of the glass cutting the air. Did you call the police?" Dominic's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The police deal with paperwork and bureaucracy. I deal with results. Marcus Kane didn't want to listen to reason. He thought he could claim ownership of something that was no longer his to touch. He reached out, his thumb grazing the edge of the bandage on my jaw. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a jarring contrast to the leashed violence I knew lived just beneath his skin. He won't be coming back, Ivy. Not tonight. Not ever. The situation has been sanitized. What does that mean? I whispered, my heart beginning to race for an entirely new reason. It means the trash has been collected, Dominic replied. You walked into that building in tatters, covered in the marks of a man who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. You will never see him again. No more looking over your shoulder. No more hiding in the shadows of your own life. I searched his face for a flicker of hesitation or guilt, but there was only a cold, dark certainty. The man who had been the architect of my nightmares was gone, erased by a man who was arguably much more dangerous. I should have been terrified, but as I looked at Dominic, all I felt was a profound, staggering sense of relief. The cage hadn't just been opened, it had been incinerated. Dominic stood and walked toward the expansive window of the hotel suite, looking out at the skyline as the storm began to break. He pulled a small, encrypted tablet from his pocket and tapped a few commands. Come here, Ivy, he said, not turning around. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, moving slowly as the pain in my side flared, and joined him at the glass. He held the screen out so I could see it. It was a search engine result for Marcus Kane. Watch, Dominic murmured. He hit a final key. The screen flickered. The social media profiles I had spent years untagging myself from vanished. The public records of his arrests, the ones that had never led to a conviction, turned into 404 not found errors. Even the digitized archives of the local newspapers that mentioned his high school football glory days blinked out of existence. I don't understand, I whispered. How can you just make him disappear? People think the internet is forever, Dominic said, his voice cold and academic. They're wrong. Data is just pulses of electricity. If you control the servers, the backdoors, and the people who maintain them, you can rewrite reality. Marcus Kane isn't just gone physically, Ivy. He's gone digital. His bank accounts have been liquidated, and the funds have been moved to untraceable offshore holdings. His lease has been terminated. According to the world, he never existed. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. And his family. His friends. Marcus didn't have friends. He had associates, Dominic countered, turning to face me. And as for his family, they've been informed he took a sudden, high-paying job in a remote location. They won't look for him. No one looks for a ghost. He stepped closer, closing the distance until I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. This is what Thorn Global does, Ivy. We don't just solve problems. We erase them. We sanitize the history of the city so that our clients, and our people, can live without the weight of the past. Am I a client now? I asked, my voice trembling. No, he said, his hand reaching out to tilt my chin up so I was forced to look into the depths of his storm-gray eyes. Clients pay for a service. You are under my protection. There is a difference. I realized then that the sanitization wasn't just about Marcus. It was about me. He was scrubbing the stains of my old life away, but in doing so, he was making me a ghost too. I had no home to go back to, no paper trail that led to that basement, and no one to turn to but the man who had just played God with my existence. Why? I asked. Why go to all this trouble for an assistant? Dominic's thumb traced the line of my lower lip, a gesture that was both a comfort and a claim. Because I saw the way you worked, Ivy. You were breaking apart, but you refused to let the cracks show. You have a resilience that most of the men in my world lack. I decided that a woman like you shouldn't be wasted on a man like Marcus. You belong in the light, even if it's a light I have to provide. He handed me a new phone, a sleek, unmarked device. Your old life is a closed file. This is your new one. From this moment on, you are Ivy Thorne in everything but name. If you accept this, the world will never hurt you again. But you have to tell me, are you ready to be erased? I looked at the black screen of the phone, reflecting my bruised but determined face. I thought of the basement, the copper taste of blood, and the endless fear. Then I looked at Dominic. Dangerous, powerful, and offering me a sanctuary built on shadows. Erase me, I said. The transition from the clinical luxury of the hotel to the Thorne residence was a blur of tinted windows and silent drivers. We arrived at the Obsidian Spire, a residential monolith that stood as the crown jewel of the city skyline. My new home was the penthouse, a glass-walled fortress that hovered above the clouds, far removed from the grit and noise of the streets where Marcus used to hunt. When the elevator doors opened directly into the living area, I gasped. The space was vast, filled with minimalist furniture and art that looked like it belonged in a museum. But as I walked toward the window, I noticed the subtle details. The reinforced glass, the biometric scanners on every door, and the silent, suit-clad men stationed at the perimeter of the terrace. This isn't an apartment, Dominic, I said, my voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. It's a vault. It's the only place in this city where I can guarantee your safety, he replied, tossing his keys onto a marble console. You have everything you need here. Clothes, food, and a medical suite. You don't ever have to leave. The word leave hung in the air. For the first few days, the freedom was intoxicating. I slept without listening for the sound of a key in a lock. I ate meals prepared by a private chef. I soaked in a tub that cost more than my previous year's rent. But by the 5th day, the silence began to weigh on me. I wandered the halls, my footsteps silenced by thick wool rugs, feeling like a ghost haunting a golden cage. I stood by the window, watching the tiny, ant-like cars below. I was safe, yes, but I was also a prisoner of my own rescue. I had traded a master who ruled with his fists for one who ruled with walls of glass and digital erasers. When Dominic returned that evening, I was waiting for him by the door. I need to work, I said, my voice firm despite the way my heart hammered. I can't just sit here and wait for the world to forget I exist. I'm a perfectionist, remember? I need a purpose. Dominic studied me, his eyes dark and unreadable. He walked toward me, stopping just inches away, his shadow falling over me like a cloak. You want to go back to the office? After what happened? I want to be useful. I don't want to be a piece of damaged equipment, kept in storage. He reached out, his hand sliding into my hair, tilting my head back. There was no violence in the gesture, only an intense territorial heat. The office is a public space, Ivy. Here I can control every breath you take. Out there, even I have blind spots. Then teach me how to navigate them, I countered. You said you didn't want a woman who was broken. If you keep me here like this, that's exactly what I'll become. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face, the first true smile I had ever seen from him. It wasn't kind. It was the smile of a man who had finally found a challenge worth his time. You have fire in you, Ivy St. Clair. Most people would be content with the silk and the safety. Very well. If you want to work, you'll work. But not as my assistant. You're going to learn the family business. You're going to learn how we keep the world clean. The following morning, Dominic didn't lead me to the executive elevator. Instead, he took me deeper into the Obsidian Spire, to a floor that wasn't listed on the directory. The doors opened to a command center that looked less like a corporate office and more like a high-altitude intelligence hub. Banks of monitors displayed global shipping routes, encrypted data streams, and high-resolution surveillance from cities I had only seen in brochures. Everyone thinks Thorn Global is about tech and real estate, Dominic said, walking toward a central glass table that flickered to life with a holographic map of the city's docks. And we are. But those are just the lungs of the operation. Control is the heart. We specialize in the movement of things people don't want found and the disappearance of things they don't want to exist. He pointed to a blinking red icon at the harbor. My family has spent 3 generations building the infrastructure of this city's undercurrent. We are the silent partners in every major deal, the shadow in every room where power is traded. We don't just sanitize assistance problems, Ivy. We sanitize the friction of the world. I looked at the monitors, realizing for the first time the scale of the man I had tethered my soul to. You're an arms dealer? A smuggler? I'm a facilitator, he corrected, his voice dropping into that smooth, dangerous register. The world is a messy place, full of people like Marcus who think they can take whatever they want. We provide the order that the law is too slow or too weak to enforce. We move the assets, we protect the interests, and we eliminate the threats. He turned to me, the blue light of the holographic map reflecting in his eyes. This is the legacy you're stepping into. It's a world of absolute loyalty and absolute consequence. There is no middle ground here. You don't just work for me anymore. You are becoming part of the mechanism that keeps this city upright. He spent the day showing me the books, not the public ones, but the ledgers of favors, the maps of safe houses, and the profiles of the sanitizers who worked under his command. It was a dizzying, terrifying education. I realized that Marcus had been nothing more than a speck of dust on a vast, intricate machine. Why show me all this? I asked as the sun began to set, casting a bloody orange glow over the command center. You could have kept me in the penthouse, and I would have been happy with the silk. Because a bird in a cage is just a pet, Dominic said, stepping close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. But a partner is a force. I don't want a pet, Ivy. I want someone who understands the weight of my crown. Someone who sees the blood on the velvet and stays anyway. He reached out, his hand trailing down my arm to interlock his fingers with mine. His grip was firm, a silent promise of a life that would be anything but safe but would be entirely ours. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim or a survivor. I felt like a participant. I was no longer hiding from the world. I was learning how to run it. The newfound stability of my life in the undercurrent was shattered 3 weeks later. I was in the command center, cross-referencing shipping manifests, when an alert flashed crimson across the main terminal. A face appeared on the screen, a man with deep-set eyes and a scar that bisected his left eyebrow. Victor Soren, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a temperature that would have frozen water. Who is he? I asked, seeing the way Dominic's jaw tightened. Rowan's primary supplier. Marcus owed him more than just money. He owed him a percentage of a shipment that never arrived. When Marcus disappeared, his debts didn't. Soren has been looking for the last person seen with him. He's been looking for you, Ivy. Fear, that old familiar poison, began to seep back into my veins. I looked at the surveillance footage on the screen. Soren was standing outside my old basement apartment, holding a photo of me, the one from my old employee ID. He thinks I have the money? I whispered. He thinks you're leverage, Dominic corrected. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. He's a cornered animal, Ivy. Dangerous because he has nothing left to lose. My security teams can neutralize him before he gets within 3 blocks of this building, but there's a complication. He paused, sliding a tablet toward me. Soren isn't just a thug. He has connections to a rival family, the ones who want to see Thorn Global fall. If I kill him, it starts a war. If I hand you over, the debt is settled. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stared at Dominic, looking for a sign, a flicker of the man who had promised to protect me. Was I just an asset to be traded when the cost of maintenance became too high? Was this the reality of the shadows? Is that what you're going to do? I asked, my voice trembling. Hand me over. Dominic walked toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped so close I could feel the rhythmic thrum of his heartbeat. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached out and took my hands, his grip like iron wrapped in velvet. I spent my entire life building this empire so that I would never have to answer to men like Soren, he said. The war was coming anyway, Ivy. He just gave me a reason to start it today. But I need to know one thing. If I burn the city down to keep you safe, are you prepared to stand in the ashes with me? Or do you want a ticket to a new city, a new name, and a life where you never have to see my face again? It was the ultimate choice. He was offering me true freedom, the kind without biometric scanners and sanitizers. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized that freedom without him would be its own kind of basement. I didn't want to run anymore. I wanted to be the reason the city burned. I don't want a new name, I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed. I want yours. Dominic's eyes flared with a dark, triumphant fire. He pulled me against him, his hand cupping the back of my head. Then Soren is a dead man. And you, Ivy, you are officially a thorn. The showdown with Victor Soren didn't happen in a dark alley or a rain-slicked shipyard. It happened in the cold, clinical silence of the Thorn Global boardroom. Dominic had orchestrated it with the same surgical precision he used to liquidate a rival company. Soren had been lured there under the guise of a settlement, but as the heavy mahogany doors locked behind him, he realized he wasn't walking into a payday. He was walking into a tomb. I stood by Dominic's side, my back straight and my head held high. I was no longer the woman in the cream-colored blouse trying to hide her ribs. I was wearing a tailored black suit that felt like armor, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was afraid. Soren looked at me, then at Dominic, his bravado crumbling like ash. The girl for the debt, Soren stammered, his eyes darting toward the exits. That was the deal. The deal changed the moment you put a price on my family, Dominic said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. He didn't raise his hand or bark an order. He simply looked at Soren with a gaze so predatory that the air seemed to leave the room. You came looking for a ghost, Victor. You found a queen instead. What happened next was swift and silent. Dominic's security team moved in, and Soren was removed from the building, and the city, with the same sanitization that had erased Marcus. As the room cleared, leaving only the two of us, the tension that had held me together for weeks finally broke. Dominic turned to me, his expression softening in a way he only allowed when we were alone. He reached out and took my hands, his thumb tracing the knuckles that no longer trembled. It's over, Ivy. The debt is settled. The war has been won before it even started. Is it ever really over? I asked, looking out at the city lights. You said there would always be threats. There will always be someone like Soren or Marcus. Dominic stepped closer, pulling me into the circle of his arms. The scent of sandalwood and ozone enveloped me, a scent that now meant home. There will be. But you'll never face them from a basement again. You'll face them from the top of the tower with me. He tilted my chin up, his eyes searching mine. I told you I didn't want a pet. I wanted a partner. Someone who could handle the shadows. I'm not afraid of the dark anymore, I whispered. Not when I'm the one controlling the lights. When he kissed me, it wasn't the desperate, bruising kiss of a man trying to claim a prize. It was gentle, reverent, and full of a quiet, terrifyingly deep love. It spoke of a future built on secrets, yes, but also on a loyalty that the world below could never understand. I had come to Thorn Global Holdings looking for a paycheck and a place to hide. I had found a man who was more dangerous than my nightmares but who cherished me for exactly who I was. Complications and all. I had traded my old broken life for a new one, etched in black glass and etched in blood. As I stood in Dominic's arms, looking out over the city that was now ours to command, I knew I had finally found where I belonged. I was no longer Ivy St. Clair, the victim. I was Ivy Thorn, the architect of my own destiny. Does Dominic's brand of protection feel like love or a different kind of cage? Let's debate in the comments. Hit subscribe for more stories where the hero is more dangerous than the villain.